projects gonna come in.
Yeah. Okay.
So it with the Lego case study is, I think it's yes.
It's a brand that has so much unlocked potential, but yet we didn't plan on 50,000. So I think that's often one of the cases. How you simplify.
John Schultz, nice to meet you. Hi. John Schultz, nice to see you. Okay, you look back at your class. I met earlier with Moki. Yeah. So Ed, you're here with Ed Lewin?
Yes, I was talking to
Ed was in, worked for us until a couple of years ago.
You were his boss?
Yeah. But I worked a lot with Ed. Great guy. Talented.
Yeah. So we were actually sharing our apartment together.
Oh, really?
I said I was on your panel.
All right. Yeah. I ran into him out on the street earlier today.
He's good at getting everywhere. Right? So I guess
He's absolute joke. That's exactly right. Are you based in London or?
I'm in Dillon. Yeah. So I sit on the leadership team with Ed actually. I head of farm myself.
Okay.
Yeah. So we're quite close.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. He's enjoying it.
How long have you been with Lego?
10 years. Yeah. So it's one of those companies that gets in your blood.
What years were you at Boston?
I was 6 to 9 weeks. So I had corporate affairs too.
I was 98 Boston. I started there. 25 years ago.
It feels like a massive resurgence.
I'm sure we did. I am sure we did.
I have a grandson in the Lego store in New York.
From Cornell.
And then
I was at Cornell.
it looks like there's a new Lego store.
And then it's been
Salt Lake
25
City.
years
It's the
of
Salt Lake
crazy
City area.
4 continents, 6 countries.
Yeah.
One of the big growth areas.
Yeah,
Six
and that's what I said. I was like, wow, I'm starting to see Lego spaces.
It's super fun, right? Now I run a practice on the board, right? I used to run offices. I opened 2 offices and then I opened Houston and I did the plan to open Florida. When I was running Davos. From there I expanded the empire.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yes. It's a massive difference.
Okay. I think we're ready to get started. Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Mahindra Group and Bain and Company, let me welcome you to this session. We'll be talking about circularity, and in particular, how to accelerate the circular transformation of industries. My name is Hernan Sáenz. I lead Bain's global performance improvement practice and co-lead our circularity work with the World Economic Forum. To get us started today, I wanted to invite my friend Francisco Betti from the World Economic Forum to tell us how they're prioritizing circularity. Fran, please.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Hernan, and a very good afternoon to all. I mean, first of all, let me mention that we are delighted to be partnering with Bain and Company and the University of Cambridge on this very important topic and initiative. I think that accelerate is the key word that you mentioned at the beginning. The hypothesis we are working on is that there is probably one reason of why we have been talking about the circular economy for the past 20 years, but it has not taken off, it's not yet the level we wanted. And that hypothesis is probably related to the fact that we have looked at circularity as an end goal. We have looked at circularity with the recycling lens only. But the findings of the work we have been doing together with Hernan and the Bain team for the past year and a half shows us that when you look at circularity as an enabler, you are actually able to unlock value, not just in terms of recycling, but in terms of efficiency and productivity, in terms of business models innovation, in terms of resiliency. And you could even take it to the way in which you engage your teams on the shop floor and across the entire value chain. So I think that the idea here, and we are working and we invite you all to be part of this conversation, is how can we really broaden the way in which we have been looking at circularity to position it as a critical enabler of the future of operations, the future of businesses, and take it to the next level so that we can really scale it.
Thank you, Francisco, and appreciate the partnership.
Likewise.
So if you're sitting here, I probably don't need to speak about the importance of circularity, why it might be a great enabler. I do think reminding all of us of the key facts is important. We extract 100 billion tons of materials a year. That is 4 times what we used to extract 50 years ago. That is 1.75 times what the Earth produces for us annually. So mark your calendar on July 28th. We will have used the biological capacity of the Earth for that year. By the way, that date has moved up 2 months in the last 20 years. Now, in that context, circularity has been shown to be a massive solution. Not only could it reduce 40% or more of greenhouse emissions, it could have a massive impact on our extraction of virgin materials from the oceans, from the water, in rivers, and from the land. But you may have seen the Circle Economy report that came out 2 days ago. Here are the numbers. 2 years ago, we were less than 10% circular. 1 year ago, we were less than 9% circular. And this year, we are less than 8% circular. The numbers went down. So there is a sustainability imperative that can be addressed through circularity. But that's not the only imperative. The supply chains of the world collapsed over the last 5 years. The certainty that you could have inputs and products disappeared. Scarcity went from being localized to synchronized globally, from being predictable to being not predictable. We can keep materials inside the economy in a circular world. And there is a business imperative. If you look at the governments and what they're doing, led probably by the EU, they are setting up the frameworks to incent and regulate circular economy. And the markets are also starting to respond. Both customers in B2B settings and consumers in B2C settings are citing circularity as a top criteria. So I like to think of circularity as the world's great enabler. Decouple economic growth from material utilization and get resilience out of it. We have an amazing panel to my left. They represent companies that are not only looking for profitable growth, but for sustainable growth. They represent companies that have all begun to embed and scale circularity in their business models. And today we'll talk about what they're doing today, how they dream about the future, what's hard about circularity and what's easier, and what else we need to do with governments, with coalitions, and with NGOs. So with no further ado, let me introduce the speakers. Directly to my left is Dr. Anish Shah, CEO and Managing Director of the Mahindra Group, who gracefully is co-hosting this session. Interesting tidbits. Mahindra has the Zero program that manages end of life for automotive vehicles. The Mahindra and Mahindra Group today recycles and reuses 71% of their waste. 71%. I love that number. At the very left, John Schultz, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. They have really begun to build circularity across their entire business model, from product design to selling IT services as a service versus as a product, and a big initiative on upcycling. And we have Tim Brooks, the Vice President of Environmental Responsibility and the Center for Sustainable Materials at LEGO. also a company that has begun to build circularity into its model. From new product design that is using bioplastics, to packaging, to replay, so that every brick gets a second life. So with that, let me start and ask the three of you a question that I think the audience will really be interested in. What do you do today in circularity? And what do you dream in the future? In 5 or 10 years, how circular is your company and what does it look like? Anish, let's start with you.
Our journey in sustainability began in 2008. And the first question here, though, is why is this important? Why is circularity important? For us, it starts with making a meaningful difference on sustainability and climate change. There has been a lot of talk around greenwashing. This morning, we were in a panel around various standards and disclosures and metrics being put in place for companies to be able to show exactly what they've done. But beyond that is where is the real difference? And the real difference comes if we can decarbonize our industries. And circularity is at the heart of doing that. So in terms of what we are doing today, we're looking at many of our industries and examining how can we create circular models that can help us decarbonize that industry. The auto industry is one of the toughest ones. If you were to look at electric cars, you would say, look, that's a great answer. But that's really not, because an average vehicle will emit 35 tons or 35,000 kilos of carbon in its lifetime. An electric vehicle will take that 35 tons down to 27. That's only about 20%. Then you've got to go beyond that and look at renewable energy. If it's all renewable energy, you could take it from 27 to 7. And the balance 7 is all the materials that are used in the vehicle. So if we can change that, then that has an equal impact as having EVs. And that's really the perspective that we want to leave. And that's where Cero, which is our auto recycling arm, has come in. And we are pushing the government in India as well to have a lot of policies around auto recycling to take older cars off the roads faster so that we can, again, reduce emission with that. And thereby use the materials that we can get from the recycling and bring them back into auto. So that's one that we're doing in the auto side, a lot more on the real estate front and a few other areas. But I would honestly say that we are at the very surface right now. We're just scratching the surface. There's a lot more to be done. This is the start of the journey on circularity in particular, while a lot has happened on different parts of sustainability. On circularity, there's a lot more to be done. There are some lessons from various players around the world, and we can talk about some of that as we go forward.
Thank you, Anish. John.
Well, first, let me thank the WEF for continuing its focus on the circular economy and for the support of Bain and others in that journey. And Herman, I agree with you that fully embracing the circular economy could be the #1 solution to the sustainability challenge that we face. And at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, we've done that in a few ways, some of them very obvious, improving the energy profile of our products, coming out with solutions like our GreenLake as a service product that increases utilization so there's greater productivity and efficiency. We believe that reduces energy use by a minimum of 30% and the like. But the item that I'm most excited about, it's something that we have been doing for a while, and we are able to do it not just for ourselves, but for our customers, is what we call upcycling. And that is the ability to take your old technology equipment, give you value for it that you can apply to your next technology buy, and then refurbish what you have given us and reuse it. Right now, with the volume that we take back, 85% is refurbished, not recycled, but refurbished. And I think in this sustainability circular economy discussion, it's really important over the next few years that we move from talking about recycling to refurbishment. The refurbishment profile from the use of resources and energy is so much greater than a recycling situation. In the last 3 years, we've taken back more than 6 million devices and refurbished them. 2.5 million PCs, over 2 million servers, over 1 million storage devices. These are items that are fully refurbished, re-warranted, and sent out into the community. It's also an opportunity to combine sustainability or circularity with digital inclusiveness. While that technology equipment may be second generation for you and not important, in many parts of the world, it will be first generation technology for them. So, refurbishment rather than recycling, I think is the key to this. And when I think about the future, it's to continue, obviously, to expand that. But I think the information you provided at the beginning should be the goal for all of us. And that is our use of the world's resources should be below the threshold of what we are actually creating. That July 28th date needs to move past the end of the year. We need to be using fewer resources than the world's creating for a little while.
Well said, John. One Earth and 85%. Another very inspiring figure. Tim, I think many of us love Lego and have family members that do.
Me too.
Tell us more.
Right. So, and I fully agree with your point on reuse or refurbishment and recycling. We can get to that. So we've been on a sustainable materials journey since 2015. And that initially was really looking at where materials come from. And I think a couple of things have changed our focus over that time, the last 7 years, towards this more circular approach. Number one was setting a science-based target, so 37% reduction by 2032. So very, very aggressive across our entire value chain. Ironically, 37% of our value chain carbon emissions come from materials. So if we could eliminate the carbon emissions from our materials, we would meet our science-based target. So there's a point one there, why we're looking much more holistically on the materials journey across the circular piece. The second one is we make little Lego minifigures. You might know them. 2019 was the day where there are more, where there are more Lego minifigures on the planet than there are people. So there's a responsibility to those people, big and small, and particularly that really led us to think about what is the volume of bricks we're putting out there, what is the carbon emissions that is associated with those bricks, and what should we do about it. So increasingly, we're looking at that entire value chain, the life cycle. You mentioned the bio-based materials. I think more related to the circular economy, I would say we are trialing bricks made from rPET, so soda bottle material. So for every 1 liter of soda bottle, you get 10 2x4 Lego bricks from that. So we're looking at more recycled plastic. We can get into some of the legislation later. That's incredibly tough to put recycled materials into toys. We're looking at our design of our products. So we have a program called Design for Disassembly, making sure the 2x4 brick made from one material is quite recyclable. But when you get into electronics, when you get into co-molded materials, that's harder to recycle. And then critically, we're looking at reuse so if we come full circle back to that point. And for me, that's where I really think we missed that reuse and refurbishment piece. We always seem to jump to recycling. It's the number one question I get all the time is, how do I recycle Lego bricks? And I say, no, you don't recycle them, you reuse them. And people sort of scratch their head, and then, of course, that sounds obvious. So we started our replay program, as you mentioned, in 2019, first in the US and then in Canada. You print off a label off the website, you find a shoebox, you fill it with all your used Lego bricks that you no longer play with. I'm sure you still all play with your Lego bricks. But if you decide that you don't want to, you send them to us, we clean them up, and we donate them to charity. And so far, since 2019, we've donated 125 million Lego bricks. And on that journey, we can share a lot of the learnings. Let's get into that. We've learned so much about what new business models might be, the problems, the challenges, et cetera, et cetera. So we're trying to address it all the way across the circle.
I think that deserves a round of applause.
Anish, you mentioned we're just getting started. The Circular Economy report said we went from below 10% to below 8%. I think all of you mentioned too much focus on recycling, and there are many other refurbish, remanufacture, repair, reuse, and we're not using them. We are at the beginning of the journey. Now, we have the proof points, and the three of you and the companies you represent are part of that. So let me ask you, what is hard? Why have we not made progress? As Fran said, we've been talking about this for 20 years, and we're less than 8%. And how do we accelerate? John, let's start with you.
Sure. I think, I think in the theme of the WEF, that private-public partnership and collaboration is going to be critical. I think we do have to change the culture around procurement and purchasing, right? We all think of new as better, more reliable, and the like, and something that's used is viewed in a much less valuable way. As we design products to be more sustainable, to be reused, we need to change the culture around them so that people don't view them as inferior and the like, but actually see the profile as something that is desirable because it is more sustainable and it is more responsible. And so I think there's an educational piece, there's a financial piece. Mm-hmm. We need to make it financially attractive. We think the upcycling work that we're doing is absolutely doing that. I think the government piece is, first of all, I've seen it in a number of ways, and ESG is a perfect example. And in particular, I would call out a number of the countries in the Nordic region who very early on in their public tenders made ESG a focus of being qualified to bid for business. I think we need to make sure we're doing the same thing on the circular economy side, not just looking at the overall net zero targets and the like, but suggesting that a certain amount of refurbished material needs to be part of the tender, needs to understand what we are actually doing from a reuse and refurbishment perspective. I think if we can see, first instance, government in their procurement process pushing circularity, especially reuse and refurbishment, that will trickle down ultimately into the private sector, and you will see the solutions come. So I think if we can do those two things, I think we can absolutely accelerate circularity.
Great. Tim, what's your perspective on scaling, acceleration, and barriers?
So yeah, certainly around the barriers, I think there are three main things. I think there is a technical barrier, there's a policy barrier, and there's a consumer barrier. But let me start in that reverse order. I think the consumer barrier is an interesting one. We all walk around assuming that consumers want this and they're desperate for reused products, and we don't actually know how to get them from consumers. And we're doing a lot of study and a lot of work. There's a lot of barriers. Consumers don't want friction. We did some studies around how could you send us the Lego bricks back to us? Would you come and drop them off at the store? Vast majority of consumers said, no, I'm not going to walk across Manhattan with a big bag of Lego bricks and drop them off at the store. I've got other things to do. So we have landed on the postal model. That seems to be the best way of sending things back. I think another thing is what level of incentivization would be required for people to send things back. Of course, if it's waste, that's one thing, but usable Lego bricks with intrinsic value, people want some sort of discount or to be paid, or with replay, the fact that they go to charity is motivation enough. But again, working out what that value proposition, and is that affordable, and can we make that stack up is another one. I think the policy part of it is a huge barrier. I mentioned that there are still many countries that ban recycled materials in toys. So getting over some of those policy issues is incredibly important. I think the use of legacy products, the use of the fact that the policy framework doesn't line up. And I think finally then the technology part. For us, we need to take high volumes of bricks back. We need to sort them. And sortation is probably our biggest challenge right now, is how do we sort bricks at speed, be able to put them back into piles, understand if they're too broken or scratched, etc. So a lot of, and then everyone loves to use the word AI, so I'll bring AI in there. That's one of the things we need to think about, is how could AI help us spot those bricks? And also, not only the bricks that people send back, also the other stuff. You would not believe what we get sent back. We get a lot of hair in our boxes. We get cans of soda, we get shoes, we get all kinds of, there's this optimistic recycling that happens as well. So a level of sortation and quality and safety and all the rest of it as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Anish, your perspective, I mean, again, you have been very successful, but there are no doubt barriers, and you feel like you're at the beginning of a journey. Like, what are those barriers? How do you envision the acceleration curve?
I think John and Tim have covered it well, so I'm just going to focus on one aspect of it, which is circularity has to be typically done in ecosystems. It's not something that a company can go out often and do it on their own. In some industries, that's possible. In most industries, that's not. So if you take the auto industry, for example, as we get a car back, you've got to be able to get an ecosystem of suppliers in there, of used car mechanics or used car service shops in there, to be able to take certain parts, certify them, to be able to give it to them and have them be reused. So there's a whole set of things that needs to be done. The regulatory framework comes into play as well. Incentives, all of those factors come into play. So it's about collaboration. And that's where I think this journey is starting now in terms of people understanding the need for that collaboration. It was easier to do sustainability projects on your own and see impact of it, and that's much easier to get impact. This is much tougher to get impact, but the impact is much more.
Yes. Well, you have moved into a topic that we think is absolutely critical, right? We have, the old capitalism was a capitalism of operating on your own and winning on your own and maintaining information in your four walls. And the new capitalism requires a level of collaboration that we have not seen in the past, that we are not necessarily good at doing. So let me ask, Tim, let's start with you on this one. How do you see the role of coalitions? Do you see a role for industry coalitions? What is hard about those coalitions? And all three of you work in leading companies. So what can the leader of the industry do?
Yeah, as you say, I mean, coalitions, we can only solve this by looking across the value chain and the coalition. So that's the obvious part. I think we are working, of course, we talk to our competitors as well. I think there's, of course, a challenge to maintain compliance and the competitive landscape. We ultimately would like to scale the circular economy into a competitive proposition, into a valuable proposition. So that's one area. I think they're all of our competitors, deep respect for them. They're all somewhat on this journey in different stages of that. I think certainly other industries is probably the richest source of collaboration for us. So whether that's people who are already taking back car parts, whether that is, we work a lot with retailers as well, and we've launched Replay with Target, driving again commercial momentum and brand awareness. But working with other people, it could be HPE, it could be lots of people who are already doing these things, help us navigate the regulatory landscapes, the technology landscapes, and the consumer landscapes. And I think it's sharing that information, because there's absolutely, again, it sounds obvious, there's no point us doing a bunch of consumer studies if HPE have already done them, and we can share knowledge, and we can get there a lot faster, we can get there more cost effectively. And of course, there's power in numbers, particularly around the regulatory landscape. And I think that's where organizations like WEF, et cetera, if we all come together and say these pieces of legislation are stopping the circular economy, and us 20 companies all believe the same thing, then things can happen.
Great. John, what is your perspective on coalitions?
Yeah, I think there are times when, private sector coalitions sort of acting as a coalition can drive certain types of change. I think here, I do feel like this is a scenario where the coalition that probably will be most effective is the public-private coalition. A little bit like climate and ESG, I think we really do need organizations like the WEF and governments to change the dialogue around the circular economy and the value of refurbished and reusable goods. I think if that happens, the private sector can then execute that plan. And I think, as you hear, I think there are lots of people who are already executing, but we need that next step forward. Some of that's regulatory. For example, in some countries in the world, certain types of computer disk drives have to be destroyed at the end of their life. Well, that fundamentally defeats the concept of reuse and refurbishment. We've got to get comfortable with the idea that we can actually clean the disk, that there isn't a security, a cyber, data leakage, a privacy risk, so that we can continue to embrace reusability. So I do see the coalition here being one that's a combination of private and public. I think public needs to drive a change in thinking and behavior. And then I think the private sector is well poised to execute that plan. And that's why, I think the advocacy of WEF and the things that folks are doing, the circularity gap report, incredibly important right now.
Very helpful. One of the attentions that we often hear, we hear about greenwashing, we hear about certifications that people don't believe in, that there is no trust. Standards for circularity, right, are not clear. And so let me ask a question that may have multiple elements to it. What do you think about setting standards? What do you think NGOs need to do in that context? And what other roles do you see NGOs playing? Maybe we'll start with you, Anish.
So, Herman, I'm just going to go back to coalitions for a minute and give a specific example which has made a significant impact already. And this is the work that the World Economic Forum has done with the First Movers Coalition, which was set up to bring companies together to start buying green materials. That was a very specific purpose, a very specific objective around that. And we were one of the founder members, and I remember having conversations with our steel suppliers and talking to them about green steel. And I got a blank stare from them as to what do you mean by green steel. Right? These are some of the top steel companies around the world. But today, there is a demand for green steel. And what we've decided in the First Movers Coalition is, let us take 5% of our procurement in a particular area. And with that, start enabling companies to build technologies around that may not be cost efficient today. And we may pay more for that 5%. But because the technology comes in, that will become more efficient tomorrow. Right. Another example here is around Maersk. They put in 2 ships, which were green ships. And they did that initially with some demand. They've built 10 more ships now. And they're on a journey where they will do a lot more as they go forward. So that's really the power of coalitions. And coming back to your question on standardization, standardization is important. Because as in anything, right, what we measure is what we will drive. It is important to have simple standards, important to have simple metrics around it. And there, I think a lot of good work has been done already. The IBC, again, at the World Economic Forum, has helped set up those standards now. There are about 200 companies reporting on those standards, and many more are going to start coming into the fold. The Big Four have been involved in setting them up and being able to monitor them going forward as well. So I think there's been a lot of good work done on the standards part.
Great. Tim, your perspectives on NGOs broadly as standards?
Yeah, I mean, I think we sort of had this bold dream of a circular standard if we could only have a score, and we talked about it before the session, from 0 to 100 on circularity. Maybe that's possible one day. I think one of the best things we can do on standardization is make it as simple as possible, to your point. So I think there's 2 components to that. One is education and information. I think the term circular economy, I respect it, but it sounds complicated, it sounds difficult. And I think we've done a lot of education on circular economy with children, also through the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and really sitting down with kids. And the Lego brick lends itself to a very simple explanation of that you can build a rocket ship, and then you can build a car, and then you know, it's a very good way of educating on circular economy. I think there's a big piece to break it down and say circular economy is, yes, about recycling, but it's also about compatibility. And I think some of the work that's been done on electrical goods and charging compatibility, and again, just to call out the humble Lego brick, it's been compatible since 1958. So everything you buy off the shelf today in a Lego store fits perfectly together with something from the late 1950s. And I think that compatibility combined with durability is like a really key facet. And I think if you could explain to people, the circular economy is about using better materials, making sure they're durable, making sure they're compatible, which aids durability and long life, and then at some point having this end-of-life journey. I think we need to make it much, much more simple, much more easy to understand, and then build that in and say, look, it's a percentage of recycled material, it's a percentage of use and reuse characteristics that we're looking for, and then it's some level of a clear pathway at the end of it. And it's really those 3 things that we're driving for.
Excellent. John, I see you nodding.
Yeah. Well, I think in the ICT space, there is, it's sufficiently narrow that I think there's a very simple answer, and that is every company being transparent about how many of their devices they reuse and how many of their devices they recycle and how many devices end up in a landfill. I mean, every company now is a technology company, and they have significant number of devices, or they're paying for devices as a service, but at the end of the day, they are sort of the custodians of those devices since they're the one using it. And I think we can get to a very simple disclosure, and I'm always wary of another disclosure and another disclosure, but in this instance, I think it's very direct and it's very simple. With all the devices you have in your company, how many of them end up in a refurbishment chain, how many end up in recycling, how many end up in the landfill, and I think that will start to drive a different level of behavior. It's not very hard to track, and it's not very ambiguous, and I think if we go down that road in ICT, I think we can change the industry.
Great, thank you. I have a few other questions, but I know the audience will have a number of questions. My colleague, Jenny Davis-Purcue, told me she had a very, very provocative question. She is the founder of our sustainability and responsibility practice. Jenny.
Great, thank you. If just imagine 5 years from now, you were told you could not buy or use any more material than is what is in your products today, how would you make money? And the reason I ask that is because that's kind of where we're heading. Because if we want to have circularity disrupt to really help with the climate goals, that's kind of what we're looking at. If we want to help it bring supply chain resilience, that's what we're looking at. So I don't know if you want to do that thought exercise here, but how would you make money? Have you thought about that? Are there ideas? And how do you get them from the back of the envelope to really scaled up such that 5 years from now, maybe it's not no more materials, but maybe it's, 20% less, then 40% less? What are the big ideas?
So I think the tech industry is in some way already headed in that direction. And when you think about that, more and more value is in software rather than hardware. And so that value chain transition has been happening. And I think the key, though, is it is still more cost effective and more desirable to grab minerals out of the earth and build new hardware to support that transformation than it is to refurbish. And so I think that the value that's happening in ICT is about software, which is less resource intensive in and of itself. But what has happened is the growth of data and the growth of software has driven so much more demand for infrastructure that it's consuming a tremendous amount of natural resources and then a lot of energy to run that. So I think we've got to find a way, as I say, to do much more in the refurbishment and reuse space. And then all the products themselves have to become more efficient and effective in order to drive down the energy use as this footprint continues to expand. So I think the general dynamics are there in the ICT space. I think the key is this efficiency around hardware that continues to be needed to drive the data and the software.
Tim?
Yeah, so we're well on the way, or well on the way at least in our thinking and our research and our development in this space. We have a new business model team in my team, and we're hiring a senior director if anyone wants a job. So our new business model team is really deep into this. We have two core focus areas. I mentioned one of them already, which is sortation, which is a technical and a software challenge, but we think that's not insurmountable. It can be done. The other one is reverse logistics. Some of the things I already talked about is where do we get the bricks from? So we have this vision of, okay, we get the bricks from somewhere. We pay for them or we incentivize them in some way, and then they go into a warehouse. That's one stage. Once they're in the warehouse, what do we do with them there, and how do we sort them? And then I think the third part of that puzzle is the consumer proposition. Who's going to buy used bricks or rent used bricks or buy models made from used bricks, et cetera? How much will they pay, et cetera? So all of that work is ongoing at the moment. And I think one of the interesting directions from our senior leadership team and our owner family is very much, use those creative examples. Everybody comes up and says, you should rent Lego bricks or you should do X and Y and Z. But until you can prove the underlying challenges, reverse logistics, sortation, the consumer proposition. Let's solve those things first, and then we can create all number of exciting products and exciting experiences off the back of that. But we have to be sure it works as well. I will say the upside is there are some challenges. We know it's much more complex than what we do today. We know that it's potentially less profitable, but of course there's some opportunities there as well. But there's an upside. When we go and survey our consumers about the replay program that we run today, 93% of them and say this either positively or overwhelmingly positively gives them a good feeling about the Lego group, about our products, about the durability of our products, about plastic in this form being good plastic. So we can see from all of our research that consumers think this is a good idea. We need to show them what it could be, a bit like the iPad. They didn't know they wanted it until they saw it. And I think a lot of the value proposition that we're trying to work on is what could it be and what are the underlying technical and this is assuming the policy challenges are solved, but what are the underlying technical challenges?
Thank you. Anish.
So Jenny, I really like how you framed it, and it's a bold bar for us to set and something that we should look at. I do want to take a step back from that, though, and talk about first, what is the objective? If the objective for us is to have a more sustainable planet, we should also be looking at what materials do we use in the first place, and look at materials that are greener in having that impact. The easy answer to it is we've got to be able to get back the products and reuse the materials from there in some form. It's probably easier doing that with steel than with plastic. But the question then comes in back again, what materials should we be using in the first place? So I think if we've got to look at it more holistically and lay out the objectives, lay out the economics behind the objectives, because that's important as well, outline what the consumer value proposition is, and then make it real.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny, for that question. Yes, there's a question in the back, and then the gentleman in the front.
Hi, thank you to the panel. It's been really interesting hearing your thoughts. My question is around the collaboration piece that you all have spoke on. So for the partners or suppliers that are either downstream or upstream of you, where you sit in the value chain, what incentive methods have you already experimented with or tried to make sure those partners are willing to come on this journey with you and collaborate in the same way or make the same commitments? And perhaps if they weren't incentive models, what were the other tactics that helped you bring other partners onto this journey?
I can go first on that. There are two things, purpose and economics. There are a number of things that purpose will drive. It's actually a very powerful term. And at the Mahindra Group, our purpose is more around driving positive change in lives of our communities to enable them to rise. We do put purpose before profit. We have been questioned on that by a number of folks, but it's worked for us for the last 77 years, and it will work for us going forward. And that's where our ecosystem often comes in and says, if we're doing this for the right purpose, we will be with you. Now, there is a limit to that, because economics will come in, and our ecosystem will also ask us, okay, we will do this with you up to this level, but what are the economics beyond that? And that's where the incentives come in. But for many of these, there are solutions to it. We've got to find ways to drive projects that have the right economics around it. And as we've seen from a number of things we've done on sustainability, there are many that actually can be justified economically as well. So it's a combination of purpose and economics.
Tim?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think purpose I would also replace with direction and setting clear targets and clear vision so that your suppliers or your partners know where you're going, of course. The economics part of then buying what they're offering or helping them to sell what you're what they're helping you to buy what they are selling, and I think the third part of it is really the knowledge sharing and actually getting out there and starting to test these things and starting to do them. And so then you have something very valuable for your partners as well. You have either, whether it's insights or it's technical knowledge. And we're doing a lot of this work, and we don't know where it's going to go. We don't know that there's a business model in this. And we have deliberately not yet set a revenue target of 2032, X amount of revenue will come from circular, because we don't know. But the more that we can share that knowledge and that information, and the more that we can bring partners along on the actual trial and test journey, whether that's our customers who stock our products or other retailers who are not yet part of our ecosystem, that information has a real value to it.
John.
I think Anish and Tim have covered it well. The one piece I would add is for us, as we continue to think about building products that lend themselves to reusability, it's important that our suppliers, because at the end of the day, many of our products involve thousands of suppliers, they are designing reusability in mind as well. Because the worst thing that can happen, right, is you have a product that would largely be reusable, but there are a few key components that are not, and as a result, you've kind of one component spoils the entirety of it. So as we look to build in reusability, that's where the vendors become very important, because we need them to be thinking about reusability for us as well.
Great. Cedric from Halsam, I think you had a question.
Yes, thank you so much. When I was hearing John's speech, I thought, "Damn, that's my speech."
We'll have to talk afterwards.
I'm in the construction material industry, so radically different.
Yeah.
And then that made me thought, this sounds too weak. And let me tell you why. Okay. Is it, we depend, I fully agree with everything that we say. We need more public-private, radical collaboration. We need public procurement. We need the standards. But on the standards, I've had an argument last night with my CEO. He said, well, in Europe, we soon have a standard we can put 35% of recycled concrete fine in our cement. He said, yeah, but that was 5 years ago. Where's the standard that tells us we can do 50%? So is it, the question I have for all of you, is it our responsibility as industry to actually push much more aggressively for bold standards? Because with the standards, it goes in the public procurement, and then it creates the demand, it creates the business case in the market for us. And can we be more aggressive for more ambitious standards? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I certainly agree with you. The beauty of the situation right now, I think, for us in the ICT space is, even absent the standards, there is a compelling economic case. We can go to a customer with aging infrastructure, tell them, we can give you money for that, and you can apply that against your new technology. We can take that back, refurbish it, and repurpose it. So there's actually a strong economic case for us, and we are seeing the growth in that business. And the key is scaling it outside of the developed world. Our two big recycling centers, two of the biggest refurbishment centers in the world, one in the US, one in Scotland, Erskine, Scotland. But how we get that across to the rest of the world is important. So in our model, we actually think the economics are compelling. But we can accelerate that, and we can drive behavior more broadly than going customer by customer with an economic case, if we get the kind of targets and the kind of push that you were describing. So I think if the economics are there, bottoms up, and you get that mind share from the government, I think we can very quickly in the ICT space make a huge change in our circular footprint. So I agree with you.
I can maybe speak, at least from the consumer products point of view, which is slightly different from the construction point of view. Standards, yes, but I think the toy industry is challenging itself. I think all of the major players are challenging each other, driving up the percentage of recycled materials. It's a competitive game. It's a brand positioning game. It's a competitive game, and the standards may come, and hopefully they do, and hopefully they follow up behind. But I don't think the toy industry, and I hopefully can speak for all of the toy industry or the major players that we know, that we're not waiting for those standards for sure.
Anish, any thoughts from you?
I think John's put it well. It needs to be done. It needs to be a collaborative effort, and we need to show why this makes sense. So we have to take the leadership in doing that.
Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you. Alex from Bain. So Hernan has mentioned the new circular gap report that was launched a couple of days ago. Indeed, the news are not really good. Only 7.2% of a circular economy. Now, my question is, what would be in your industries let's say, an ambitious enough ambition as to how circular can they get? Or actually, let me rephrase, is there a limit to how circular your industries can get?
Anish?
So we are in 20 industries. I'm not going to go through industry by industry.
Just choose one.
But there will be a limit in certain industries. There are certain, if you take automobile and tractor, for example, steel, some of the precious materials that are in catalytic converters, those are easier to recycle. And from a percentage standpoint, that may actually be a reasonable starting point. And then there are others that you just can't recycle, but you can maybe use some materials in a different form. So it's a challenge that we've got to address in terms of what is full potential on this. I don't think we've done that as yet. And that we've got to do for every industry and be able to break out those materials and say, here's where we can use it, here's how we can use it, and then outline a plan as to how we're going to do it.
I think I would say there's two limits, or if you like, or challenges, again, in that space. One of them is around not everything can be reused, because I think there has to be a level of newness. Certainly in our industry, toys, children want new things. They want their toys to reflect the latest character, the latest movie they saw as well. So we know that needs to be a level of newness, which means we can't reuse all of the bricks all of the time and sell reused bricks. But that's when the second part comes in, I think. But we can make new bricks and new colors and new properties and new characters from recycled material. But the challenge there, I think, and it's specific to some industries, certainly toys, it could also be medical, etc., is traceability. And I think we need to work a lot harder on whether that's blockchain or whatever it happens to be on recycled materials. We need far higher levels of traceability on recycled materials. The recycled materials we're dealing with have a very wide tolerance, a technical tolerance, a physical tolerance, a chemical tolerance. We're used to working with much more narrow tolerances, so we want to get that traceability higher. We need to know where it comes from. That's why we've chosen rPET or PET, the soda bottle. We know where it comes from. We know it's food safe, etc. But if we can dial up some of that traceability challenge and create a real marketplace, which is for recycled materials, which is safe, which is traceable, which has ISO quality standards, that then you're really in a game changer. But that's one of the biggest barriers.
Maybe just a brief add is, I think in the IT space, the threshold should be very high. I think the question for us is less around ultimately getting to a number that's closer to 90 or 100%. But again, back to how much of that is refurbished and reused versus recycled, right? I think over time in the IT, there'll be a point where you can't continue to refurbish and you will ultimately have to recycle. But I think the important thing is to not simply think about recycling, which is, I think, where the predominant dialogue is today, landfill versus recycle. And I think we need to change the game and change the discussion to say our principal focus should be refurbish, reuse. Recycle comes at the very end when that reuse is not capable.
Great, thank you very much. I have one last question. As Francisco mentioned, the World Economic Forum is building a community to try to accelerate the circular transformation of industries. What advice do you have for the World Economic Forum, for that community that hopefully you will join, and for all of us that are supporting it in really driving significant momentum?
I can make a start. I think, like all of these conversations, and I think what we've all tried to do is move away from the ambition, and we must do something, to the practical and the tangible action. At least that's what I've also tried to do here today. And I think that's what the WEF also needs to do. I think we are good, all of us, at creating the sense of urgency through our words and through our ambitions. But we really need to get tangible case studies on the table, understand what is working, what isn't working, move beyond the ambition space. So I think the more tangibility, the more case studies, the more site visits, the more whatever it takes to get it physical and tangible and real, I think is the key.
John, your advice?
Yeah, so this is a little bit of maybe a strange comparison, but I'll make it anyway. Yesterday I was meeting with the new head of the UN Commission for Human Rights, the new commissioner. And my discussion with him was, I've been amazed at how much traction global climate change has gotten in the last 5 years. And it is like nothing I've seen in my lifetime in terms of how quickly And I know there were a lot of people working in this space for a long time, so maybe it's an overnight success, 20 years in the making, but it feels like there was all of a sudden this turning point in it, and it has just accelerated. And the discussion was, when you think about the human rights crises around the world, we've never been able to get that kind of traction in the human rights world that we've gotten in the climate change world in the last 5 years. I think for circular economy, it has to become central to climate change. It needs to ride the wave of climate change. I don't think that is in people's minds today. They don't associate those two things. And I think the Commission or this alliance, if it can do that, I think we will see the type of progress in circular economy that we are seeing now around climate change.
Anish.
So John, I'd agree with you. While we began our journey 15 years ago, there were really very few conversations on that for a very long time. And it's literally been in the last 4 to 5 years where it's become center stage. Now, in terms of the specific advice, I would say, like the First Movers Coalition, keep a very specific objective, have a clear set of achievable targets in a sense, and share best practices. And then have the momentum that comes in from all the private sector players to make it happen.
Great. Well, let me first thank Mahindra for co-hosting this session with us. I hope you are all inspired by specific examples at scale of circularity and what leading companies can do. So let me thank Anish, Tim, John for being here. And as we heard today, circularity can be the great enabler that finally decouples the economic growth that we need with the much more limited resource utilization that our planet needs. The answer needs to be systemic. It can't just be recycling, and you heard it from all three of them. And the answer has to be supported by all the stakeholders. It's not companies alone, it's coalitions, it's ecosystems, it is the government, it is NGOs. So let me close by thanking also the forum for supporting this initiative. You will see up here 2 barcodes, one with the paper that we published this week, framing the future of circularity, and the other one, hopefully, for your company to join our circular community. Thank you very much.